Good morning. Those of you in video land. It is now Sunday morning, and Robert is about to start. Yesterday, you know.
Flip the switch.
Mary, you're going to have to move over a little bit so we get a cleaner picture. Shoot over a little bit, guys.
Shoot over.
Okay, no, seriously now. Yesterday, Robert packed in many, many patterns, and we noticed that some of you seem to be going into a slight altered state.
No.
Now, because of that, this morning, Robert will do something a little bit different so that there remains a clarity of understanding.
Darn.
Well, there's several people. See, there was this trance state that was a little hard to observe on the camera, where we had about 12 people nodding off. And there were several others going. So, what we intend to do this morning is to allow everyone to wake up. Because we were at a resort area here in Florida, and everyone loves these seminars so much, we all went out to a comedy club last night. And I kind of think that maybe this morning Robert will tend to give us a few jokes as well as some of the other sleight of mouth patterns that he is so eminently good at. Robert, without further ado, or ado. So I anchored in the laughter last night.
Wait, you're taking my... I need my... If we're going to have clarity here. Good morning. Oh, yes, of course.
By the way, we do have copies of Robert's books over there, and he has so kindly consented to autograph them for an extra $1. I thought, yes,
yeah.
at the break, you may purchase his 3 books. Would you like to comment on your books?
Comment on my books. They're very creatively titled.
Yes.
One is called Neurolinguistic Programming, one is called Roots of Neurolinguistic Programming, and one is called Applications of Neurolinguistic Programming. So that would really be, you know, since language really is the NLP thing, you know. Yeah, they're all very creatively colored. They're all like the, Neurolinguistic Programming, Volume 1, which was very cryptically titled since it's only been 7 or 8 years since it came out, and there's no Volume 2, so. This is called Sleight of Book or something, I don't know. Anyway, it's basically about strategies. It was intended to be like a textbook. It's not like a Frogs and the Princess book. So sometimes when people look at the little notation, they kind of go to, they do a little sleight of mouth to algebra, which it's not, and the little notations in the book aren't algebra. But it's basically about strategies, the whole idea of representational systems and how those link together in order to form the kind of cognitive strategies that people use when they think, kind of like computer programs. In computer programs of the brain, basically its statement is that the most important personal computer is the one that sits up there in between your ears, and yet it's the one that comes without a user's manual, and the software isn't always too user-friendly. So it's trying to give you some strategies for how to program, but it kind of lays that out. Roots of neurolinguistic programming is not, it's not roots in a basic sense, it's roots in what kind of technical fields did NLP come from. For example, neurophysiology, linguistics, systems theory, and that kind of thing. So it's actually, when it says roots, doesn't mean simple, it means, it's actually quite technical in a way. Although, a lot of people find that to be valuable because it does give you technical background. Applications, on the other.
At the very beginning, when you start with the triangle and the square and the circle, the question over to this side is, how do you know that? That
Right.
question I understand pretty well, but last night I was thinking about that other question, what makes it that way? And I'm beginning to think that question could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
In fact, it could even mean something like the old why that we don't use anymore. In other words,
Well, actually, see, here's an interesting thing with beliefs. Why is, to me, is an okay question to ask.
in this
Yeah, because in a sense, what you're after here is the why questions.
That's what
See, the interesting thing about what we're referring to here is in Gestalt, first in Gestalt therapy, and then kind of picked up by NLP and some of the more quote-unquote process-oriented therapies and psychological methods. I don't mean just therapy, but certainly in business and in education or health as well. The question is, it doesn't do you much good to have people give you all kinds of reasons as to why things have happened. What you want to know is how they happened and what's happening and where you want to go. Now, when you start working with beliefs, on the other hand, this is where it is okay to know why, because we're not just about, well, what strategy are we going to use to get from point A to point B? We are looking for things that have to do with identity. So therefore, from my way of thinking, why is, I mean, see, in sleight of mouth, you can say, okay, I won't say, why are you doing it? I'll use a how question. How come you're doing it? You know? But I mean, so you can shift it around.
Yeah.
But the purpose is to look for things like intention, like consequence, like motivational elements that sometimes, instead of giving yourself this rule that says, oh, I can't use a why question, and yet I want to know something about motivation, I want to know something about the background of this particular issue that the person is dealing with, that you can ask why.
That's what it came down to when I find myself saying, what makes it that way? You may as well be asking,
Yeah.
why is it that way?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're getting.
And I think the only thing about why is that there's a number of different things that why could mean.
Yeah.
When you say, well, why does this happen, you could be saying, what is the cause of it, or you could be saying, what is the justification for it, or you could be saying, you don't have to be asking specifically about some sensory-based cause.
Right.
And see, the whole thing is, with the meta model and all that form of questioning, you're trying to get to some kind of a precision. And since why could mean cause, why could mean justification, intent, and why could also mean, yeah, well, I think a number of other possibilities here, motivation, consequence, that it was too general of a term, and when you're working with something where you're trying to be precise about it, that is going to be too many directions for people to go. On the other hand, we're not talking about precision here. In fact, I've always I was thinking of maybe naming this book, On Sleight of Mouth, Distortion. Since 90% of our communication takes place on a level that's distorted, why try to force precision? You can utilize distortion to make lots of changes. And so in a sense, it's okay for me. I might want to actually have the person even be less precise and less clear about what they're trying to say so that I can move around inside of some of these categories as opposed to kind of paint myself into a corner by being too precise. So, indeed, I think you can ask why. So that's a good point. Any other?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that. If you are working with someone and you get to the point of why is that so or whatever, and they just look at you and say, well, I don't know.
Good. I mean, that's what do you do at that point?
Yeah.
That again is where I like to also again take a step back and put what we're doing here into the frame. That this isn't the only methodology that you're using. When I get to an I don't know, that's what I call typically in doing beliefs work an impasse, and that's where I want to be. So I want to find the impasse. I want to find the place where the person can't go any further. And at that point, you might typically find that it's just a feeling. Well, the way I know it is it's just a feeling, or I don't know. Or they look up and left. And this is where some of the other NLP techniques really become valuable, because you can say, all right, just take that feeling of stuckness that you don't know where it comes from or why it's there, and just stay with it and go back into the past with it. And a lot of times what you'll find is that that's the point. That it's very often the case that some present belief is going to come from some past experience that has sort of drifted outside of consciousness, some childhood experience that because of the limited resources that you had at that time, you were forced to build a belief about yourself, something like, well, I can't do that, I'm incapable of doing this, or I'm helpless in this situation. And at that point, it was true. However, you have never updated it since that time. And so what happens is that you'll still be operating from some kind of a belief, from some kind of a feeling that was formed in an earlier period of your life that has gone out of consciousness. You don't remember specifically anymore. And that's why some of the beliefs, when you start tracking back to how do you know that, or what causes it, you just get this feeling, and you don't know where it comes from. And NLP has some ways of being able to deal with that. And that's, in a sense, is a good place to be. I'm always kind of glad when I get an I don't know, because typically that gives me the answer of where it's coming from. If the person says, I don't know, it probably is not coming from the present. And this is something I wanted to also address. When you're using sleight of mouth, and the person has a present belief, but that present belief is coming from the past, trying to deal with it in the present may or may not do anything with it. Chances are, you could end up coming up with a lot of good arguments and explanations, but it won't change anything. And this is where, when we were talking about things that aren't logical, but you just still have the feeling that it's so, a lot of times it's from the past. Now, what I'll do there is, instead of trying to change the belief here in the present and just give more logical arguments, take the person back to the past when they built the belief. So maybe this is when they're 3 years old now, and they built the belief, and use some of the sleight of mouth there. And that can really make some interesting changes. So in an I don't know, or let's make it more common, in an I don't know cause from the present, because typically when you're eliciting this, you're eliciting it about the present. You're here in the present. You hit an I don't know. Go to the past with it. That's just a very helpful strategy that will keep you from going around in circles a lot in the present.
What if you're in a non-therapeutic setting and it's obvious that the belief that's being expressed is based on past experience?
Based on the past. Then what you would do in this point is to use some of the metaphorical techniques. One of the sleight of mouth patterns that we didn't address yesterday is analogy. And what I'll do sometimes in that situation where I can't take the person and go, okay, let's go to the past with this, is what I can do is to start using an analogy and say, well, this belief that you have is like a child who is stuck in such and such a situation and doesn't know what to do. So what I can do is actually refer to the past, but in an analogy. I don't have to say, well, let's take this feeling and go back with it. Actually, someone was talking this morning about, I think this is another thing that you can do, about a person who has a whole set of Ericksonian techniques, uses Ericksonian techniques, where instead of saying, what is this feeling and where does it come from, you can say, what is the feeling like? Is it like a black cloud? I mean, so here we have a question mark. You don't know what it is, but tell me what it's like. And that's another real interesting thing you can do. Instead of saying, what is it? Because the person will say, I don't know what it is. Then you can say, well, what is it like? And going to an analogy can often really help you to make some progress where you wouldn't normally be able to get to this. Socrates would do this kind of thing all the time. He'd say something like, well, if you were a dentist, what would this be? If you were a dentist and had this belief, what would it be like here? Or something like that. I think maybe some of the best way to answer that question, too, is going to be more through demonstration. And what I'd like to do, maybe we could pick some examples there. It would be a little bit easier, because I think doing it or showing it is a little easier than trying to describe it. Showing how to use an analogy to make a breakthrough. Could you give me a kind of a context, perhaps?
Well, in a business context where, I can give you a very specific example.
Right. Yeah.
An employer objects to having people paid Friday at noon and wishes to have them paid Friday at the close of business.
Mm-hmm.
And their belief is that if people are paid Friday at noon, they will not continue to work for the rest of the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
and that belief is stated to be the result of, quote, a lifetime of experience.
Right.
And you're not really in a situation where you can talk to this business person and take them back into the past, and yet the belief under the
Yeah.
circumstances is destructive.
Well, I understand. I understand the context, and what I would say at this point is, in that case, I wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I mean, that's a little different situation than the person that's stuck in an I don't know and going to the past. With this person, I mean, you could use a bunch of different things. You could say, well, there's a number of other frames that I could go to that might be able to change that, which would be, I could say, well, what other kinds of motivations could people have? I mean, people aren't only motivated by money. What other motivations might they have, might be able to add so that people would be interested in working till the end of Fridays. So, I mean, that's one thought that I go to is rather than try to challenge it, and I think here's where we could get into the whole idea of pacing and leading, where I'm going to say, yeah, that may be true that people would do that if money was their only motivation. But what other kinds of motivations might people have? He's saying, yeah, what you could start to do is to start showing, well, how the quality of work, so maybe they still work, but their quality of work diminishes anyway. So are they putting in time, or are they putting in quality? Also, in doing this, one of the things that I'd like to start to introduce is, let's say we want to start to work on changing some beliefs, or not changing them, but influencing them, because I don't think I would necessarily want to change this person's belief. I want to pace it and lead it. Maybe I can add some other elements to it, something like that. One of the things that we can do, if you want to start having a strategy for what to do with the limiting belief, you've got a cause, and you've got its evidence, and you've got the value, the criteria. If I want to start to sleight of mouth this, I need to know a couple of things. I need to know, what would I rather have the person do? So, for example, one of the things I'd like you to start thinking about, and as we start working with using sleight of mouth to actually accomplish something as opposed to just open up options in a belief, question is, what is the new belief that you'd rather have a person have, or that they want? Okay, so with this individual, what is the belief, what belief would you like the person to end up with?
Well, there are several possibilities. I guess my goal would be not to change his belief, but to make him more flexible about the possibilities for other beliefs.
Yes.
Because he's extremely rigid in this belief, and to me, that's the problem.
Okay.
Because that rigidity takes other forms as other beliefs come up.
Okay, so what I'm hearing him say then is our goal is not to change it. So here's your first way of thinking about the strategy. What is my goal with the belief I'm working on? Is it to actually take it and install another belief in its place, or to track it to a different belief, or is it just to open this one up a little bit? Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing is, remember yesterday we were saying, what other resourceful beliefs does the person have? In other words, this guy, I'm sure, has got good beliefs, sure he's got very creative abilities in other areas, maybe where it comes to things other than paying these people. Remember yesterday we were talking about what's a limiting belief you have, what is an empowering belief that you have, or a creative belief that you have. And so here we might say, this is the one I'm trying to track this to. And here is a resource belief that I have here. One thing that I do typically when I'm just talking with somebody and gathering information is I start getting a bunch of other resources where this is positive, positive, positive. And now I can start to track all around here. I can track to, here's the belief I'd like to have them have. Here's another place where the person is very, very open or creative. Here's another belief where they're able to really be able to interact with other people well. And so now I can start tracking all around, and I've sort of got this one surrounded. And that makes it a lot easier for me to move around in terms of the sleight of mouth. So I want to come back directly to that. There was a couple.
I just had one thing come to mind. Would it be, is it because they got paid or because it's Friday?
Yeah.
A little distortion there.
He says, was it because they got paid or because it was Friday? If you paid them at noon on Thursday, would they quit working all the way till Friday afternoon?
By analogy, I think this person would say yes.
Okay. So what we're saying is, here's where I hear the thing. He goes, people will not work if you pay them. I always thought they worked because you paid them. Which, by the way, you notice what I just did there is redefine the belief a little bit. In other words, because he goes, yeah, that's what I'm saying, you know. And then you go, well, wait a minute. So he has to kind of think it. Now, the other thing I would do is I go, what's the cause? What makes people not work if they get money?
Because people who are, quote, working for a paycheck are essentially relying on that paycheck every week or every 2 weeks, and they need the money right then, and as soon as they get it, they'll, quote, spend it.
Okay.
And they're thinking about spending it, even if they're not able to actually go out and spend it.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's a bunch of people here. We got some slider mouthers already here. Let's go with it, folks. Okay, what do you got? Okay, yeah.
This is the interesting belief thing here that I think I have a little bit of experience with this type of thinking, and I think part of it is that the belief is that people are solely motivated by money, and I think that then opens up a whole other can of worms about employer versus employees, and maybe that's
Right.
what we're-
So one of the things he's saying is we could track back. What's the cause? The reason that this happens is because people are solely motivated by money. That's that belief. And I could track back from there. What makes people only motivated by money? I mean, I could find, well, what's the belief behind that? Because in a sense, what it's saying is, you know, you could be saying, well, you must not believe in your employees very much.
Well, I think my own hypothetical is that it's worse than that.
Uh-huh.
My own thinking is that he believes that there are certain people, quote, better people, who can be motivated by other things than money, but there's another class of people who are only motivated by money, and that's this group. And so they need to be dealt with in an extremely rigid way. I mean, I think it's an unfortunate set of beliefs that even underlies this one.
Okay. So you said number one strategy that I'm hearing at this point is that you can go to an underlying belief. Now that might make you, what I'm hearing you say though, is that might get you into a can of worms that's a worse direction. You might go, is that going to help or is that going to get in my way? So instead of chunking in that direction and going to something deeper, well, maybe what I want to do is to go away from that deeper belief. If I'm actually trying to set this up so that he has more flexibility in his thinking, rather than try to go to that level, why don't I come out and see what other directions I can go?
Can you give a couple examples, can you generate some examples of all those techniques you did yesterday for this example?
Yeah, sure. So he says, well, so one thing we could do, actually it's another strategy, is I could start to generate examples and see which ones might fit. And that would be another strategy. The one is I could start getting some of these, and the other one is I could start to generate examples. So first of all, let's put the belief into a structure. So the structure is that you can't pay people at lunchtime on Friday. Can't pay at lunch. Or they'll stop working. Lifetime of experience. And the cause is that people are solely motivated by money. Okay, now let's say we want to redefine it. We could redefine any number of these. So I could say, well, it's not so much that they stop working as is that they start spending the money, that they start doing something different. Okay, so I could say it seems to me that your concern isn't just that they stop working because they're still there. It's that they start partying or they start relaxing. Okay, now he might say yes. And I go, oh, if he agrees with that, now I can go, oh, now relaxing might mean that there's stress taken off what they're doing. And if stress is taken off their work, Maybe they can perform certain things better on Friday afternoons. So the question would be, which things do people perform better on Friday afternoons if they're more relaxed? Which kind of jobs might people do better if they're relaxed? I mean, again, I don't know what he would say, and this is where we'd have to do in the role play. This is just an example where I start making a chain of meanings. It's not that they stop working, they start relaxing. What positive things can I attach to relaxation that might actually be accomplishing work? Okay, so that would be redefined. I could go over here and say, it's not that people are, it's not that they're solely motivated by money. It seems to me that they're motivated by lack of money, is what you're saying. Okay, so that's a redefine. People are motivated by not having money. So, then I can go somewhere with that. But that would be redefining this side. Okay. Consequence. Consequence of this would be, okay, if this is really true, and you can't pay people at lunchtime, or they stop working, you could either take I actually did a little bit of a positive consequence to that, where I was saying, well, I could make a positive consequence of them, not working on Friday afternoon to say, well, what kind of things could fit in with people being in that particular state? It's not they stop working, they change state, and what could be a positive consequence of that? Something like that.
More accurate in your work if they're relaxed.
Right. Yeah. In other words, what he's saying is that a consequence of the fact that they stop working might be that they would be more accurate in another area. Let's do...
Another consequence could be, it's true that they maybe work less ordinarily, but if you don't pay them, they may be resenting you that whole afternoon and work less because of that.
Yeah, another thing is, so he says if you don't pay them, that the consequence could be that they resent you, and I think that would be a good way of taking just this one and doing it, yeah.
Well, the problem isn't that he's going to pay him. He's going to have to pay him. It's a matter of doing it.
Yeah, so he's saying the problem isn't paying them, it's when you pay them. I mean, so you could say, this is what I'm understanding you doing there is chunking this up. I could take this and chunk it up and saying, well, it's not really the issue is whether you pay them at lunch or not. Really, what I'm hearing you say is a larger issue of timing in when you reinforce people. The timing of reinforcement. Now notice, that's what I was saying yesterday as a chunk up. So if this is true, then I can do interesting things like go to animal studies. I can point out how the interesting thing about human beings is that, and this is a true story, by the way, here's an analogy. You know that they did research where, they have rats run a maze and they put cheese at the end? And so they decided to see how human beings would work, in comparison to rats. So they took $5 and ran college students through, and they got $5 at the end. Now here's the interesting thing about reinforcement, if we're going to chunk up to there. When they stopped putting the cheese at the end, rats quit running the maze. College students, on the other hand, and this is true, would actually break into the lab at night to go through the maze to see if they left money at the end. College students never stopped. They always went through it if the money was at the end, even if they didn't put it there for a long time. So, yeah, so that's what I'm saying is we go to. So if we chunk it up, but see, that's the interesting thing is we go chunk it up and say, wait a minute, let's look at reinforcement, timing of reinforcement. Actually, what the studies show is not that people stop doing it if the money isn't there. In fact, that they keep doing it. And it's true that variable reinforcement is a more effective way of installing a behavior to last. For example, what I do with the guys say something like, if I wanted to use that study, I'd say, really what you want to do is sometimes pay them at lunch and sometimes pay them at the end of the day, so they won't know. Or something like that. That is that, maybe you could pay them half at lunch and half at the end, or I don't know. So, and try variable reinforcement schedules. And in other words, what I'm saying is, if the guy's going to not treat people as, if you're not going to treat a person as a person anyway, well, let's go and treat them like they're rats, And, but I mean, what you're doing is you're pacing and leading it and saying, well, how do rats get reinforced? Do rats stop working after they get the cheese? Well, no, it depends on the various elements of the reinforcement. So I can chunk up to there, and now what I'm doing is not talking about people and not getting into any of the interpersonal things or the ego things. And we're talking about animal reinforcement now, not just people reinforcement. So that would be chunking up. Okay, let's take some other things.
Well-
Well,
Let's start here. Okay, ladies first.
it sounds like you. And as
You mean?
yeah, him talking about it. And we can't know all the facts. And
Yeah.
as an employer and having had employees, I know some of the things too that go on from that point of view. And I have had employees that were girls that's only, I mean, money burned a hole in their pocket. So if they did get paid,
They went out.
they went out to blow it immediately.
Mhm.
And of course, they may come back and having had that
Yeah.
experience, have more fun in the rest of the day, but they
Get
might
your mind
not,
out of the gutter, Mary.
they might not come back at all. And then also, there are some that I've had that I know are alcoholics, and if they get their money, they might spend it, and then they drink for the rest of the weekend.
Now, by the way, listen to what she's doing is pacing. Hey, I know what it's like to be an employer too, but listen to what she's doing. She's chunking down. Some girls do, some girls don't. This is this is that. So, Mary.
And then some you don't want to.
I think she's been in Ed's trainings too long.
Some if you don't pay them, will be spending the rest of the day just thinking about how they're going to pay it and can't settle down.
Right,
to
so
work.
she's saying is
it
that
just
actually...
depends.
What she's saying is doing, but what she does is, see, she brings an interesting thing. She paces. Some people do that, burns a hole in their pocket. Person's going, yeah, you understand what I'm talking about. And then she adds another element, which I think is really neat. She goes, and some girls, if you don't pay them until the end, they spend the whole afternoon thinking about how they're going to spend it anyway. So they waste the time anyway. We also had one person saying, you resent the time. You resent that you're not getting paid then. So now what we do, though, is at least we open it up so that there's equal time to, and I think this is what you're saying, is that at least opens up an option. So in other words, we start with a chunking down thing, and then we have some more options.
I was just thinking of the counterexample, but on the other hand,
Good.
think of all the enthusiasm and appreciation that you'll generate if you pay them at a time that would be more pleasing.
That's right. So now what Edmund, so we're good. We've got chunk up, we've got chunk down, we've done redefine, we've done consequence, and he says now we can do counterexample, which is, he says, he was sort of saying as a counterexample, but people can also be pleased and so enthusiastic because you pay them when they want it, that they might actually work better for you. Now, I think a counterexample, let's take counterexamples and say, counterexample would be, are there any times, I would like a real specific way to even ask this guy for a counterexample would be to say, in your lifetime of experience, did you ever have a time when you paid people and they didn't work anyway? I mean, you paid them at the end and they still didn't work up until the end. That'd be, I mean, you could actually ask that person for a counterexample, which in a sense forces him to chunk down or her to chunk down. Also, I could say, is there times when you did pay people at noontime and they really actually worked harder at the end of the day? In your lifetime of experience. So now notice what I'm doing is I'm not trying to impose something on the individual. I'm actually asking the person for a counterexample. So and here's typically, by the way that you do this. You typically chunk down and then go to counterexamples. So here would be a very common strategy. I do her thing where I go, yeah, I know what that's like. Some people just money just burns a hole in their pocket, or they go out and they spend on booze, blah, 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 I pace it. And I say, and some people don't. Some people might resent it if they don't get paid. So I just open up that option. And then I say, in fact, have you ever had times in your lifetime of experience where you did pay people at noon and they actually worked harder towards the end? And what about those kind of people and what made that happen? So now what you have is I've chunked down for them. I took control in a sense, chunked it down for them, and now I'm asking them for a counterexample. So I go pace, lead to a chunk down, and then actually ask for counterexample. Okay, I know there's a number of questions. Let's just for a second review. We've gone chunk down, chunk up. Here we're just doing counterexamples, which would be, and by the way, I did a counterexample to that with the rat metaphor. That was going to an analogy and making a counterexample to the belief. The one that we haven't done yet, what was the other one we did?
The change in the frame, which I haven't.
Change of frame size. Right. So he's got an example. Also, you've had your hand up for a moment there, too.
I was real curious when I heard you saying that
pleasure aspect of getting the money. Something I'd like to find out how you'd bring out in the questioning is, whose responsibility is it how they spend their money when the employer is giving the money?
I would take the next step. See, for me, then after I did that, I would say, okay, I can't decide how many of you, so how could we do this? Could we maybe put an hour in the end of each day and then quit at noon on a Friday?
Yeah, right.
Or something like that, you know.
Well, what
find
she's
another
doing,
way.
and here's, by the way, so here's another very general strategy. So we talked about pace and lead, and then another interesting thing you can do is you can actually, like an Erickson would always prescribe the symptom, prescribe the problem. Prescribing the problem means instead of trying to make people do what they're not going to do, you know, tell them to do what they're going to do anyway, and then fit it in somewhere else. So what she's saying is, well, so tell them to quit at noon, but they're going to work an extra half an hour each of the other days, you know, until they get there. Yeah, so that could be something. So here again, you pace, chunk it down. Also, what you could do is, there's another way you can chunk it down, which is to say, how many minutes before the end of Friday is how much money going to, you know, or how much motivation and money work. So for example, that's when I was saying, if I pay them midday on Wednesday, would they not work the rest of the week? Because I don't know if that would be the case. And there's where I start chunking. When does this time thing about if I pay them stop? Is it really true that if I pay people at midday on Wednesday that they wouldn't work the whole second half of the week? Why wouldn't they just not work the first half of the week up until they got paid and then start working because of the motivation?
How about if you paid them Monday?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's what we did. Our own personal experience. My brother and I were in a business with my father along quite a few years ago, and we ran into almost an identical situation. And I think that he paid him on Friday at noon because it was traditional. But he had the same argument that once you paid him, they weren't worth anything. And so what we did was, my brother and I talked him into paying them on Monday at noon, and if they didn't work the rest of the week, we fired them. Which was the only way we could get him to go along with this. But once we started paying them at noon on Monday, we found out that they worked more, they were more anxious to work even on Saturday, because by the weekend, they didn't have as much money as they thought they were going to have, you know, then you get into that whole game.
Well, yeah, so here's where I was also thinking is, I mean, this is where the whole thing about beliefs and stuff gets really fun. Because what you can do is, you can also go, this is where you start chunking up and going to reinforcement here instead of chunking down. So you go, all right, some people work only for money, the more enlightened ones don't. Well, who do you want working for you? Are the ones that only work for money or the ones that don't? How are you going to tell? And that's what you can say is, well, give them the money at the beginning of the week, and the ones that, I mean, two things will happen. Either you'll weed out the ones that you really don't want working for you, that are just money hungry. Number two is, because they, like he said, they get to the end of the week and they don't have the money, they have to learn how to be motivated by something other than money. So by reinforcing, how do you teach people to jump levels and start to become enlightened workers? You know, well, you pay them at the beginning of the week, and you know they're going to have to learn to manage their money. So, in other words, that now you jump levels on what are you teaching them. Okay, so change frame size.
Well, and actually, that's almost everything I was going to say about changing frame size, except I was going to put that into a future context. I was going to say, now, right now you have this kind of people. You pace it. You know, you have these unenlightened people, but can you imagine a time a year from now where using those methods, you will have gotten all your employees to where they're motivated in all these other ways, and what a better environment that would be.
Yeah. So in other words, what he's saying is, I go to frame size and I can say, well, instead of just looking at it this Friday at the end of this week and for that half of a day, let's start taking and looking at history of, let's really change frame size, look at history of working behavior, and, you know, and that kind of thing. And let's look at what other companies do as well. If you're going to change frame size, you'd say, let's find companies who have people, and how do other companies do it to deal with the situation? Again, I pace it. This is true. What do other companies do to deal with that? I mean, this is the way we've been doing it all along, and the problem is that doing it this way, see, another thing I would do is I'd leverage the lifetime of experience thing.
Yeah.
Person goes, I'm doing this because it's always happened this way. So I'd say, well, since it's always happened this way, maybe you should try something different, and it would, it would be different. In other words, this is always, This is always one of the things that people say is, well, I know this is true because it's always been this way. And what you do is you say, well, how much longer are you going to keep doing it then before you prove to yourself that it isn't going to work, to accomplish what you want? So you actually pace that and say, well, since it's always ended up with the same result, then let's try something different. Was the lifetime of experience in trying different modes of reinforcing people? Now, if the person says, yeah, I've tried everything in the book, then I can say, great, now let me know what you've tried, because I want to pace them. I don't want to argue with them. And they might give me some interesting information that would open up some channels for me. So I start to change the frame size.
A risky pace is go back to the other way. People are motivated to sell their money. Oh, that's good. Now, because they're only motivated by money, we cut down the restroom, we cut down the benefits, and then getting the other person to counter sort with polarity response.
Right.
Say, well, we want better quality, we want more from this, we want more from that. And
What
the
do
more you argue towards cutting down, the more they get invested in these words.
Yeah. So actually what he's doing, he's saying, well, I can force the person to go to a counterexample by saying, well, since this is true, then who cares what their working conditions are? Since they're only motivated by money, let's give them more money, and we won't provide them with pencils to write with or something, or we won't provide them with insurance benefits, we'll just give them money, or something like that. And actually what will happen is the person will have to realize, well, wait a minute, I guess people do want more than just money in their work. They do want to, sometimes people do want prestige, they do want to accomplish things. And by the way, I would say in general, if I'm talking about business strategies like that, almost invariably, the best way to go is to an analogy of some sort. In other words, then especially if you don't know their business, you don't want to be talking with them about their business. So I tend to go to analogy like with rats. And so I'll use a lot of analogies of things like a ship captain and their crew. I mean, in this case, if you want to go to an analogy, you could talk about Captain Bligh, first of all, you talk about how they're the ship captain, they've got to get the crew working on their boat, and how does the ship captain go about getting their crew to work? Well, we know that the crew's going to go out and they could get drunk on the shore if they get their shore leave too soon, etc., etc. And then instead of actually talking with this person about his company and his people and his lifetime of experience, which is going to start getting ego in the way, and who are you to tell me how to run my business? I go to running ships, and I make a nice analogy, and then we start exploring other options inside of that analogy. And so I would say for those of you that work in a business, especially if you're working in a meeting or something where people are going to start arguing with each other and stuff, go to analogies and kind of set up the options and the beliefs and then come back. One of the things that a general strategy is is this. If people are stuck on the concrete, go to the abstract. People are stuck in the abstract, go to the concrete. You'll often find that if you want to open up options, rather than try to confront it on the same level, you're going to shift levels. For example, remember we were saying, if someone's got an identity issue and I want to open up some more options, what I might want to do is to come down to specific behaviors, rather than trying to confront identity things. If somebody's got a particular behavior thing that they're trying to deal with, I might want to jump up to beliefs or to identity in order to find where my options are. So that's kind of I think if you want to think of strategies, let's review, we went over the different patterns. Let's also review the strategies that we have here. So number one was to chunk up and find counterexamples, or chunk down and find counterexamples, both in the context of pacing and leading. Okay. Another one was to jump levels with the person. So the person is talking about something concrete, and we go to something more abstract to try and deal with it. Okay. If you're going to chunk up or down, usually the purpose of chunking up or down, I mean, in a way, the purpose of practically all of these maneuvers, whether it's redefining or chunking up or chunking down, is to end with some kind of a counterexample that the person is going to have to resort for themselves. So you notice that as opposed to trying to change the belief for them, I chunk down, chunk up, pace and lead, find a counterexample, and then let the person redecide how to deal with it. So in other words, rather than me telling them, so here's what you should believe at the end, I just say, so here's a counterexample. What do you do with it? So another one was to actually prescribe the problem. Take the problem and go, well, since we can't work around it, since it's reality, let's hold the problem constant and start to vary the contexts. So how could we make use out of this? Number one would be to say, what kind of work would be better for people to do at the end of Friday afternoon when they're ready to let go? Another one would be to say, well, let's let them go, since they're going to do it anyway, and that's our big motivation is they're going to get paid at noon, we'll make them work all the harder. They'll have to come in an hour early on Friday so they can get their money at noon. And since we're going to be giving them what they want, which is to be paid at noon, they're going to be happy with us because we're responding to their needs, and they'll be all the more motivated to work harder that morning, or to work more that morning or something. We'll make them work through lunch, and then they get the whole afternoon. So that would be another strategy, is prescribing them. Or the other option is to say, great, we don't want people that just work for money working for us anyway. Let's pay them on Monday. If they don't work, we'll fire them. And if otherwise, they'll have to learn how to be motivated by something other than money, and then that's great. We'll solve the problem. So there's some of the strategies. In all cases, I want you to notice, we want to do pacing and leading. Now you can go pacing and leading to a chunk up, to a more abstract level, go pacing and leading to a more concrete, specific level, to an analogy, and then go to a counterexample. So the analogy's purpose is to lead you to, well, this doesn't quite fit with the belief. So either I can go to rats or ships and crews, and captains of the ship, that kind of thing. What I find, by the way, a lot is that people who are really good at doing sleight of mouth stuff in business, they have a certain set of analogies that they use over and over again, so that you take, those analogies, kind of like you start with a set of basic analogies, and then what you do is, like sports analogies are real common ones. You have a team of people playing baseball or football or something, or you have rats in a maze, or you can have ships and captains. And then what you do is, as you listen to what the belief is, the limiting belief is, you start actually, while they're talking, fit it into one of these analogies. And that will start, and you find out which one of these analogies gives me the most room to move with this person. Okay, so one of the things I want to offer you is, that is a strategy that you might find yourself using. Pick maybe a half a dozen really good analogies for things. And as people tell you what their belief is, start fitting it into those analogies. And then see how that works. So, for example, I know one guy does a little reframe where he says what he does with employees is he has them, instead of putting something like employee, he has them he puts a little, what do they call it, a nameplate that says, Robert Dilts, consultant. So even though they're an employee, he has them take on the role of being a consultant and says, now if you were a consultant to this company, how would you react differently? You wouldn't expect that the company's going to take care of you, pay all of your benefits, do all this stuff. You'd want to work because you'd know that they'd keep you on and keep paying you if you did your job. And so what he does is, it's a real kind of little interesting maneuver. He actually says, you guys aren't really employees, you're consultants to me. Which actually then turns around the employee's point of view on what they're doing. So he could also go to the employee and find out how we would shift. Let me check the time here. I think it's time to take a morning break here. Just no. Well, what I want to do is, we started here by I wanted to start to integrate in through the different kinds of techniques that we use and put them into strategic maneuvers, because what makes them work is the strategy that you use them inside. One of the things I thought we might do, by the way, before we break, is that Denise and I have been talking about some possible ways of doing some of this, understanding some of these sleight of mouth patterns in a nonverbal way. And one of the things that we thought about might be a little fun thing to do during the break or right before the break is in the context of, say, something like charades. When you're trying to do charades and you want somebody to guess the answer to it, you know how sometimes you go whole thing and you do an analogy, and sometimes you go first syllable and you make it sound like the first syllable? Those things would be analogies to chunking down. to going to a consequence. And what I thought you might be interesting to do is to play a little charades game where somebody comes up with something, and what you do is, instead of just doing your typical charades, you have to act it out maybe, but you have to label it. You go, here's the thing I'm thinking of, but this is a consequence to it. And then I act out the consequence, and you try and figure out what it is. And then I go, well, here's a redefine of it. It's not this, but it's like this. And I show what it's like. And I say, here's a small chunk of it, and I show you a small chunk. Or here's something that's the whole thing. Okay, so you understand that the idea would be you could do all of these patterns in a nonverbal way that would also be more kinesthetic for you kinesthetic learners, and also more visual for you visual learners, as to how would I, if I'm playing a charades game, how would I go about using consequence as an element of charades? Because you could do it, and we might as well make sleight of charade.
Being as I'm a visual, would you show me?
Well, yes. Do you want to, shall we?
Yeah. Oh, good. It's like maybe you didn't do it myself.
Okay, so let's do, and what we'll do is just set this up, and then this is something you could do at the, so how would you want to do this? Do you want to be what we could do is, do you want to think of a word and do the acting, or think of a movie, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Want me to think of a movie?
Yeah, think of a movie.
Okay.
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 Now, here's what we can do. I haven't thought out the mechanics of it that much. Either I could have her show you a consequence that relates to this. So you have a title.
Yeah.
What I could do is, I could actually request that she and I could work together, and I could actually request that she does something that chunks the whole thing up, or that she does something that chunks part of it up. I think what I more prefer to do is to have you figure out a way that you'd like for them to get it, and then tell us whether it's going to be a small chunk, a consequence. But just like you, rather than doing first syllable, I mean, you can do chunk down and show us first syllable, but I'd like you to categorize what you're going to do in the context of Sleight of Mouth. And you can ask me that.
This is going to act out the title of the...
Okay, so you're going to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, there's a title of the movie, and I can either go, it has 5 words, and here's the first syllable of the first word. That's chunking down.
Or which word I was going to do first. And
Yeah. So, or you could do the whole title, act out the whole thing.
act out the whole title.
So which were you going to do? Chunk down
I
or
was
chunk?
going to chunk down to each word at a time.
Okay, so that's okay. All I want you to do is say, okay, this is a Sleight of Mouth strategy. Okay, so do
Okay.
forward. There's the 4th word.
When? Gone with the wind.
Now,
I'm good at this.
so
Let's go on with the wind.
yeah. Now the thing is, I'd like for you to think about, because what we're doing here is we're talking about deep structure and nonverbal analogies to Sleight of Mouth. How did you figure it out? Did you start taking this behavior and putting it in different contexts? Did you go to language first and say, it looks like wind, what else would go with Gone with the Wind, so on and so forth, and put in terms of book titles? Huh?
Her strategy of saying, 4 words, and then that she's going to, she went through Gone with the Wind, on her fingers, and then she did 4, and then she, did the whole chunk. It ended with the word wind, but she acted...
By the way, what did she act out? And I think what Mary is leading to is what she acted out was a consequence, right? You have to act out a consequence, which, okay, so what I want you to, the purpose of doing the little exercise, number 1, to give you something nonverbal to do, since what we're doing is so verbally oriented for the most part. And number 2,
Why don't you send them out to have sex?
to have you think about how these nonverbal things are expressions of the Sleight of Mouth patterns we've been using. Chunks up, chunk down, consequence, attention, that kind of thing. Yes? Let's do a chunk up. How could you do?
How could I chunk up? I'm making a stutter. Don't do it.
All right, I'll show you one what I could do, okay? You could go, I can go, you know, something like that where it's gone, it's blown away, it's gone with the wind. So I take the whole concept. If I chunk down, let's say if I want to chunk down, I'd take something like, I could take the first word gone, and I want to use an analogy, so I can go, it sounds like, it's like, and then I might take, I could take something like fawn, which would be a similarity. It's a
Or gun.
yeah, gun with the wind. Sounds like
Sounds
and then blow somebody away with it. Yeah.
Now we know I was gone with doing too, my whole body was kind of gone.
Yeah, she was actually doing sort of a whole thing. So but you could chunk down when you do the chunk down and make an analogy. It sounds like or a similarity.
But the effectiveness as a communicator is the same.
Right.
Like, you're not pacing, you're not leading, like when you put up blue, that was terrible.
Well.
I mean, but the point of it is, that would not be a good intervention.
No.
I mean, at least for me.
Yeah.
For someone else, it might be a good intervention. So you try to match your intervention strategy to the person.
Yeah. So what he's saying is, I was trying to just demonstrate what I would try to do for a whole thing, and he says, well, that didn't work for him. He wouldn't know how to do that. And so that, I think what's interesting about it is that it is a real nice analogy to the kind of things that we're talking about, as he's pointing out in terms of pacing and leading, as well as technique, strategy, what you're trying to accomplish, whether you tend to go to small pieces or tend to go to whole things, tend to go to consequences, tend to go to analogies. Any one of those would be a useful sleight of mouth strategy. So what I'd like to do then is to say, we'll take, it's 11:30 now, let's take, 20 minutes? And what we can do is if you want like the first 10 minutes, what you could do is to get together into groups, or the second 10 minutes, however you'd like to do it, and do a little bit with the charades. If you don't want to, you can go relax. If you do want to, what Denise can do is to set up some of the groups. So we will start working again in 20 minutes. If you'd like to do I think everybody's out playing charades or something, or else hooky, one or the other.
All that information that never show up to you.
Yeah, I know. Give them all the good stuff in the morning. Actually, there was an interesting follow-up to that. We were going a little further, and let's see him. Jack? I guess he's out there. Anyway, Jack was. It's okay. He doesn't have to. We were talking about a follow-up, and he said there was another interesting result of doing this thing where they paid people on Monday, and I thought it was an interesting thing because we started talking about reinforcement, that it's not so much just that you get the money. If money is your reinforcement, and if it's your only reinforcement, then you get into interesting things about reinforcement schedules. For example, if a rat pushes a button and it doesn't get the food out of this thing from pushing the button until a week later, do you think it's going to make an association? Do you think it's going to want to push the button more? No. So the interesting thing then becomes, when do you give people the money? The more that they see it connected with their efforts, then the more they're going to make the connection, the more it's going to become a reinforcement. So one of the things that Jack was pointing out is that actually they kept trying to get people to come in and work on Saturdays, which was really difficult, even though they were paying them time and a half. So they found that an interesting added benefit was that if they paid people on Monday, they saw their immediate results, the results more immediately from the extra work that they did on Saturday. And so it was a real interesting thing that they could see the results sooner, which actually tied in the motivational element even more. And so it was another interesting continuation of that process, of how to take the belief that people are solely motivated by money and actually use it to create more options. Here's what I wanted to do next is we've went over some basic strategies here. I want to do some more demonstration with other beliefs. I know we took kind of one here and we went around it from a number of different points of view. I want to do some more demonstrations of putting these together. However, I also would like to have you get a chance to solidify in your behavior some of the patterns that we've done so far, the chunking up, chunking down, et cetera, going to an intent we also talked about a little bit. And I want to introduce a couple of other ones that will sort of be our major patterns for the rest of the day. And remember, I said I'd like to do this in the context of a role play where two people kind of role play a conflict, and you'll be using sleight of mouth patterns to create a conflict, and then take a person who's going to be a negotiator, and the conflict you can set up can either be a business conflict or it can be a family conflict. I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter. It could be between a teacher and a student or two teachers or however you want to set it up. And then what I'm going to do is, while the two people are out setting up their role play, I'm going to keep the third person in here and give you a couple of extra patterns. And your job is going to be then to resolve the conflict. And the people who have role played it, your job is, of course, to role play it to the best of your ability. And we'll see how can you use sleight of mouth as opposed to just one-on-one with somebody to create a resolution where it's not me that's arguing with this person, it's me that is actually working from the point of view of setting frames on their behavior where they're dealing with one another. So to do that, the first step is to get into groups of threes. So why don't we first get into groups of threes and then decide which two, if somebody has a role play that they'd like to do, decide which two are going to be the role playees. Okay? So do that right now. And I'll give the other patterns. Yeah. Role players, what your job is to pick some kind of a content and that involves a conflict. Also, role players, your jobs are to role play. Remember I was saying yesterday, one of you should at least, you can incorporate whatever you want with what we've learned so far. But I'd like for one of you to be chunking down and going to counterexamples, and the other person to be chunking up and changing the frame size. So one person is going to be kind of going, looking at the big picture and taking these things and generalizing it. The other person's going to be saying, well, but let's take this piece of that, and that doesn't fit in, and so on and so forth. So I'd like you to role play, to see if you can figure into your role play some basic element like that. Now, obviously, this isn't a test of how well you know these patterns. So if it's not exact, it's okay. It's no big problem. But I'd like to have you, at least, I think you'll get an interesting insight into certain types of conflicts and personalities if one of you keeps going to the big stuff and the other one keeps going to the little things. Okay. So, you choose that, your two role players, you can go out and choose that yourself. It could be,
We're gonna go get married.
yeah. Okay. Now, third person, negotiators, you stay in here.
I'm like, look, good. Let's go get married.
Negotiators, you're going to stay in here. Role players, go ahead outside and figure out your role play. You'll have about 10 minutes.
You're a negotiator?
I'm a negotiator.
I thought you were a fighter.
But I'm
Good.
still.
Yes, yes. Okay. Close that door now. What I'm going to do is to give you guys 3 patterns. The first pattern is going to be, all right, okay. We'll go over them. And actually, what I'm going to have you do is use these patterns to the best that you can with the folks that you're going to be working with. And then at the end, I think it'd be interesting for you to explain the pattern, or at least try to explain them to the person so you can let them know what you were doing. And then we'll also go over them, whatever other confusion spots there might be at the end of the exercise. So here's going to be year 3. Hierarchy of criteria. Metaframe. And apply to self. So, yes. Yes. Right. Two are outside being the, you're going to role play a conflict together. So you work out your conflict. One of you is going to chunk up and one of you will chunk in. And negotiator, you are going to get the techniques to try to resolve it. So your goal here is not to try to win any arguments with these people. Your goal is to try to set a frame around what they're doing and use some of these belief things in order to help them to resolve a conflict. Hierarchy of criteria is a very important one in that its purpose is basically to identify something that is more important than the issues that they're arguing about right there. Or if it's with another person who has a particular belief, to identify something that is more important than the particular belief issue that they're dealing with. So if somebody goes, I'm so mad because my daughter misbehaves, you can say, is it more important that she loves you than she just behaves correctly or something? That would be an attempt. I don't know how, I mean, I'm not saying how well it would work, but that would be an attempt to move to a level, something that's more important. And remember our logical levels. Capabilities are typically more important than specific behaviors. Beliefs are more important than capabilities, and identity is more important than beliefs. So, as you listen to the people arguing, try to find out, are they arguing about a specific behavior? 9 times out of 10, it's going to come down to something like that. So your job first is to start to refer their conflict to something that's more important. So for example, if you have people in a business that are arguing about how they're running the business, what you might want to do is to say, well, don't you think it's more important to be successful than just to be right? You want your company to be successful, don't you? So what you do is you first chunk above, you go to something more important and typically a higher level, more abstract than the issue that they're dealing with. This is the thing where you set, it's kind of like setting an outcome frame to begin with. You have two people, say family members that are arguing, and you're saying, well, what is your goal? What is it that you really want to get out of what we're doing here? Okay, it's not going to just be to win the argument. They're trying to win the argument to get to things that are more important. So what you want to do, as far as hierarchies then, is to refer to things that can be more important. What you might want to do is, let's go over a couple of the examples where somebody goes, I can't do X because I've never done it before. You might want to say, isn't it more important to challenge your boundaries than to simply identify and reinforce them? Because the person in this belief, they're saying, here's this problem that I have. And you can say, well, isn't it more important to challenge boundaries than just to simply make boundaries? So that would be trying to go to something that's more important. Because you're trying to take, that's a specific behavior, and you're going to capabilities of challenging them. If I care about others, they'll take advantage of me. Would you rather be taken advantage of or completely ignored? In other words, they're kind of trying to say, isn't it more important to at least have contact with people than, I mean, if you didn't have any contact, you didn't care about anybody, wouldn't that actually be worse? Again, it's reevaluating it from the point of view of something that is more important. The next one, you were late, so you don't care about me. Don't you think it's more important to complete things than just to be on time? The person is trying to go to something more important. You say mean things, so you're a bad person. Don't you think it's more important to be realistic than nice? So again, the maneuver here and the kind of things that you would say to the people as they're arguing is to say, wait a minute, you guys, don't you think that it's more important for you to present a model to your children of how people should communicate than how to be right at the expense of somebody else? That would be like an attempt to make a hierarchy. You're making their role model to their children more important than getting their particular point across. So that would be a hierarchy.
No, I was going to say something about the incident. I'm sure you've read Leslie Cameron had the woman about the carpet.
Right. He's talking about another, it's kind of like a context reframe where somebody's complaining about the dirt on the carpet and say, yeah, imagine if you had a clean carpet and nobody around.
The footprints in the front.
Yeah. So, people would leave footprints, and again, the context was it's more important to have people and to be in relationships than it is to have a clean house. So, That's that maneuver. And I think you'll find that as a negotiator, that's extremely powerful tool. It'll get people out of their content things right away. So that's one of your tools. Next tool, metaframe. Metaframe and apply to self are probably some of the most interesting of the sleight of mouth. They're the most unique to sleight of mouth, because some of these other things you can be familiar with from logic and so on and so forth. But a metaframe is a little bit different. What you do in a metaframe is, as it says here, you're evaluating the belief that the person has. Not yet. From the frame of an ongoing, personally oriented context. Now, what that means is if I have two people fighting, and they're going to typically be saying, well, you always do this. They're not talking about what's happening right now. I want to frame their conflict in terms of things that are happening right now. So, for example, a common metaframe that NLP gives you is, well, the only reason that you're arguing is because you're visual and you're kinesthetic. And so you can't see what she's saying. So you notice that the metaframe is, yeah, I'm not talking about your belief. I'm not talking about the content. I'm not trying to reframe content or context. I'm saying the only reason you're having a problem is because of this thing that's happening right here in the ongoing context. Remember, if somebody puts a metaframe on you like we were talking about yesterday, where they say, people don't accept me because, I'm being persecuted because they don't accept me, and they start kind of applying it to you. One of the ways I know around that is just to put another metaframe on it, which is to say, well, you're in our context right now. That belief is making it hard for me to accept what you're saying. Or it seems to me that you're not accepting the kind of things that I'm talking about either, in a sense. So what I want to do is to bring it to the present context and comment on what's happening. For example, if I say to somebody, it sounds to me like you have a hidden agenda going on here, or that there's something else behind it, that's called a metaframe, because I'm commenting about what's happening. I'm going meta, meaning above, the actual ongoing situation and commenting on what's happening here. And usually people, when they're arguing, are caught in content about past or future, or you always do that, or you never do that. So that the metaframe then allows you to set up something about the ongoing context. Now, positive types of metaframes to set would be, well, you guys are here because you want some additional input from me. And I can probably think of things in ways that you haven't thought about. And the way that you've been trying to solve this problem so far hasn't worked for you. So therefore, anything that you do that's the same as what you've always done probably won't work. So what we're going to do is do different things. Now, this is something you set up before they ever get started. And notice, it's about the present. It's about you've got to do things different than you've ever done them before, and I have perceptions about it that you don't have yet. Now, whenever they start going back into their old arguments, you say, oh, wait a minute, you're just doing the same things you've already done before, and you know that isn't going to work. So now I can keep going back to that frame. I can say, oh, wait, remember this frame? And they go, oh, yeah. And here's the thing, is if I can get them to agree with that frame at the beginning, before they start arguing, and I recommend that you do this, before you let them go into it, set a frame that you can come back to. Like that. Don't try. See, if you try to set it when they're already arguing, you have to kind of deal with the argumentation. If you set the metaframe ahead of time.
How would you do that?
Well, just like I said, I'd say, okay, here we are, we're sitting down. I understand, I don't know yet what you two have to argue about, but I know probably that the way that you have been trying to solve this in the past hasn't worked. And so one of the reasons that you're here to speak with me is because I can provide some new perceptions into this. Is that right? Now, anytime that they disagree with me, I can say, oh, wait a minute, remember, here's my new perceptions, because what you've been doing, remember you agreed before that what you had been doing in the past hadn't worked. Yes?
But how, if you don't observe them actually engaging with one another, how do you know what it is they're doing?
You don't. All you know is that the reason that they're coming to you in this context is because they can't solve it. I just know that
What I'm getting at is if they start arguing and engaging in something that they did in the past, you're not aware of that. To start with, how are you going to be able to point that out and say, well, this obviously...
Well, what I'm saying is you know that they're going to start doing things that are going to be mean, I just wait until I see something that happens that's unproductive, and then I label that as being something.
Then they have to disagree with themselves instead of disagreeing with
Right.
you.
He's saying then they have to disagree with their own thing as opposed to disagreeing with you. If you don't set this frame ahead of time, then you have the problem is that you might get stuck in there. And this is one of the things that Freud used to do. Freud was a fantastic metaframer. Metaframing meant, hey, I mean, the only reason that you're upset with me is because of transference. It's not me, I mean, it's the metaframe. So you go, no, it isn't transference. Oh, well, I mean, that's of course part of the transference, that you would disagree with me, right? I mean, so all of a sudden, everything that you do is related to this metaframe of transference. He would also do things like saying, well, the rules of our therapy is that you have to tell me everything that comes in your mind, no matter how painful it is. And then if people didn't want to tell him, he'd say, no, it's not me. I can't violate this rule. I mean, I really care for you. I don't want you to have to do something that's painful. That's just the rule of doing therapy. It's not me that's making you do the painful thing, that's saying the painful things. That's just a metaframe. That's what we're doing. So the other interesting thing is that it really allows you to not have to take the heat if the people get uptight about it. You say, well, that's the frame, guys. Sorry. That's what we agreed to. I'm really here supporting you.
Okay, so say it again, you say, okay, you're raising the past didn't work, so...
Yeah, so you're here to get new perceptions from me and to do things differently than you've done them before. Because you know what you've done before has not gotten you towards the goals. Yeah. Right, if they did, he says, if they did, you wouldn't be here with me. So there's other metaframes, but that's just a common one that you would use. Now, you can use other metaframes like going, well, your only problem is that you've got, it's just that you have a negative anchor to this. And it's a meta frame in that it's saying, it's like Freud talking about transference. It's something that you're not aware of that's happening in the present. It's nobody's fault. It's just this negative anchor that's happening. So let's first start with the positive anchor. Let's go over some of the examples. I think that'll also help a little bit. So a person goes, I can't do this because I haven't done it before. And you say, well, you only believe that because your unconscious mind hasn't yet discovered or acknowledged all your unconscious creativity. So in other words, a common metaframe that people would use is, the only reason you're having this problem is because you're not letting your unconscious use all its resources. How are you going to argue with that? How do you know what your unconscious knows or doesn't know? It's unconscious.
It's because it's a nose.
We're on almost, are you the role players?
Yeah.
We're not ready yet. One more pattern. It'll be about 2 more minutes, I think.
Robert, just information-wise, 1 o'clock lunch.
Yeah. I think this exercise will be done just in time. Okay? So in other words, I'm commenting on, I'm saying, well, the only reason that you have to believe that you can't do it is just because you're not allowing your unconscious to manifest itself. Well, again, how's a person going to argue that? And it takes the emphasis off the content and puts it onto, well, how do I know if my unconscious is going to be manifesting? Someone says, I care about others and they'll take advantage of me. And say, well, you only believe that because you have faulty imprints, past role models of how people should act. Well, once again, I'm putting a meta thing around this. I'm not arguing the belief. I'm saying, well, the only reason that you have to have this belief or that this is affecting you in this way is because of this meta level experience. It's hot in here, isn't it? I see you all right. We can either turn that up or we're almost done. So we can, for just about another 2 seconds. I'll just do one more example on the metaframe here. You were late, so you don't care about me. This is actually one of those ones you got to watch out for rapport. You're just feeling that way because you build unrealistic expectations about other people and then blame them when you get disappointed. So you're saying, again, the only reason that you're having this response is because of this other frame. Now, if the person says, well, I don't build expectations that way, you say, well, that's an unrealistic expectation itself. Last one, apply to self. Apply to self is where you take some part of the belief statement that the person has used and you actually evaluate the belief from one of the important criteria that has been mentioned in the belief itself. So for example, if somebody goes, saying mean things means you're a bad person, you'd say, that's a mean thing to say. So I take the belief and I say, how does this belief fit its own criteria? If somebody goes, it's risky to try new things, I can say, isn't it a risk to believe that it's risky to do new things? Couldn't that be risking the fact that you might not learn how to do things that are necessary to survive? So I take the purpose of the belief, one of its stated criteria, and I try to bring the belief under its own value structure. Okay, so I think the best way to do this is with a few more examples. Somebody says, I can't, well, let's skip that example for now. Take the next page, because that one, I'd rather take ones that are clearer. If I care about others, they'll take advantage of me. That's a pretty uncaring belief to have. I mean, so I say this belief, since caring is an issue here, one of the things I can do is to point out how the belief itself is uncaring. Somebody says, people will take advantage of me. I can say people could take advantage of that belief. So again, I am trying to take the belief, and it's a funny kind of a maneuver. Yeah, it's a funny kind of a thing that you're doing because it's not a linear thing. It's not a, you're trying to take this statement and saying, how does the belief fit under its own purpose, its own intent? Can I apply the intent of the belief to actually get the person to change the belief? You were late, so you don't care about me. Now you tell me. Didn't you care enough to tell me earlier? So in other words, you use the lateness or the timing issue on the belief itself. You don't care about me again. It's an uncaring thing to say. You say mean things, you're a bad person. Well, that's a mean thing to say. Or it's also bad to judge others as bad. So again, I take part of this belief and I'm trying to use it as a leverage to shift the belief. So for example, if somebody goes, oh, this person never listens to me. All he does is yaks, and never listens to what I have to say. So what you can do is to say, you can say something like, well, listen to what you're saying. If you never give them the opportunity to listen, if you only tell them that they don't listen to you, is that the thing that you want them to hear? What do you really want them to hear? So I try to take some part of what their issue is and actually apply that issue to show how the conflict that you're having is actually working against the purpose of your belief. And that's what it means to apply the belief to itself. So for example, if somebody goes, NLP is dangerous because it's manipulative, I could either say, that's a dangerous thing to say to an NLP person. Are you sure you want to say that? Or you could say, that's a pretty manipulative statement to make. You manipulate other people into believing that it might not be true. So again, you could apply either side, either criteria that's being brought up in this belief to itself. So let's review. One is hierarchies. One of the most important things that you have as a negotiator is to be able to find things that are more important to the people than the content of their issue. That will get you miles in resolving conflicts. Find something that's more important than the thing that they're arguing about, and refer to that. Number two, meta-frames. Instead of talking about their beliefs, you want to talk about meta-comment on their communication. You want to comment on their patterns of communication and their beliefs. You also want to comment about the purpose of the context. This is where you say, I'm here to give you new ideas, you're here to learn new ideas. That's a meta-frame around the whole thing. Okay, so if you set that in the beginning, it means that when you introduce a new idea, you're not arguing with them, you're doing what the frame is about. See, so it gives you this real, you're saying, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just trying to introduce a new idea, which is what our meta-frame is. So again, it gives you something to refer to so that you're not going to have to take heat if you disagree with them. And number three, applying to self. Try to use their own criteria to leverage change in themselves. Again, if someone's afraid to do something new because of a risk, you might also show how it can be just as much of a risk to believe that you shouldn't do new things. That's pretty risky. Okay? Now, again, I don't expect you when you're doing this to be, oh, I'm doing this pattern, now I'm doing this pattern. I want to introduce those to you so you just do what you can do. Forget about the structure of it. You have the patterns. let them come out as is appropriate. At the end, what you might want to go back, we'll debrief, and you can tell the people, this is what I was trying to do when I did that. Were you aware of how I was using this criteria? One other little thing I would just remind you is to really, since this is a role play, it's not that important that you have to worry about, solving the problem or whatever. So you can take a few risks, so to speak, if you want to. Try something new. Even if it doesn't fit with necessarily the way you would typically operate. Obviously, you can probably fit these into the way that you might typically operate. But it's okay to take a few risks doing this. And the other thing is to take action. I see sometimes people let the folks that are doing it go on a little too long. You're going to learn more if you try to influence it more. And since, again, it's a role play, and the purpose is to not have to worry about messing it up because it's just a role play. It's kind of make some interventions and don't let them go on too long. Even if it's just doing something crazy, it's okay. Yeah. Have fun. I think that's the byword here. All right. I'll bring them in. We'll have about 20 minutes. I think it should be fun. These three patterns. Hierarchy, meaning trying to find something that was more important than the particular issue that you were in conflict about to draw you to a unity on a larger level. Metaframing, which was putting the belief conflict that you had into a frame that was going around the ongoing personal context. That is, instead of talking about the beliefs or the past or the future, metaframing what you're doing right here and now. And then applying to self, which would be taking some part of the belief, some of the criteria, intention, purpose, whatever you want to call it, and actually having you evaluate your own belief conflict from the point of view of what you're trying to prevent or to achieve with the belief itself, which I think all are what I would call meta-maneuvers. They're all, instead of trying to change the structure of the belief, trying to challenge the belief or move it around in this way, they are all things that go above the belief and sort of apply back onto it, which is you're not actually trying to change the belief in any way when you do it. You're not trying to say it's not this or it's not that. What you're doing is you're saying, evaluate what's happening here from this more, this larger or more meta context.
Would you do a demonstration, one of excellence, for us to observe?
Well, actually, that was part of what I was going to ask, because I wanted to find out if anybody had trouble doing one of these with one of these situations, if you couldn't figure out how to metaframe a certain thing or how to use one of these. That's kind of what I had in mind, so I agree with that. But is it on? No, it's not on. Sorry. I hope we missed a lot of that, maybe.
That's not what we're recording.
Oh, okay. So first of all, let's find out. I mean, in your group, were you meta man? So this is a job for meta man, meta woman, meta person. Well, was there in your group what happened?
I think the guy that did this part did excellent.
He did excellently. Okay. Did anybody, even though the person did excellently, because I would validate that your identities are all excellent, but have any specific behavior problems, that is, to have a difficulty with accomplishing one of these particular maneuvers. In other words, to see how I might go about dealing with the same issue with your group. Who? Which two? Pat and who? Do you want to do yours? See how where did you end up with? Did you? Yeah. Well, I don't know. Does your partner think so? No, we didn't. Yes, we did. I thought we did resolution. No, wait a minute. Well, because what would be useful is we could have, if somebody just wanted to be a live, one of your groups be a live demonstration, we can show how to do some of these things. We just need somebody to do it. Richard, do you want to do it here?
What's the question? Would someone volunteer to be up there?
Yeah, group, to do your group, so we don't have to figure out a role play. Just do a role play.
I didn't role play.
To continue on your role play.
No, You role play.
I know what you would look.
I role play being.
Who is it that you want to, do you guys?
Yeah.
Once you two guys go up, you were great. Go.
Okay,
This was a good.
all right. So let's see how we would do it. Have a seat. Go for it. We'll see what we would do here. Using some. So,
The problem is he's a wimp. I mean, I'm saying fairly, he's always wimp, he's always overgeneralizes, he's never specific, he's just always placates it all.
Just in the big picture, you have to take things in context. And just
what do you think?
Okay, in the big picture, you just take everything and just not be too concerned about it, and just don't be disassociated and don't become involved in a specific controversial item.
But you're so spineless. You never get down to issues, you never, if someone was raping your wife, you'd say, you know, please don't, or
You have to
after
look
you're
at the overall
finished.
context. Probably that's not a specific area, or that is a specific area, but you want to look at the overall area of how things are generally perceived and how one should take
so
them.
first we have to set a meta frame here. Okay, so I just want to get, so we're here, what's going on here. They're giving you information about criteria, and of course about the meta patterns that they're using in terms of sleight of mouth. So the first thing I want to know, though, if I was working in this group, is, well, what are you doing here? What do you want? I mean, what is your outcome?
Some idiot said I had to do this as an exercise. I haven't the foggiest notion what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get credit, certification or something, so I can cure people like you do.
Well, I mean, what difference does it make to you if this person is spineless or not? I mean, I'm just curious.
Well, to be specific, it irritates every fiber of my body.
And I'm saying just look at the big picture and relax, and don't get yourself involved in situations where you have to become, where you cannot adjust, and be flexible.
Okay, so now, first thing is when I go for a meta frame, he actually puts a meta frame here where he says, well, I'm just here because somebody said I had to be here. I mean, it's not an uncommon kind of a frame if you just look at the form of it, not the content. Well, some idiot told me that I was supposed to do this, blah, blah, blah. So what I want to do for you is say, okay, well, since this frame is you got to do something here in order to learn something from it, what would you like to learn from this spineless person or with this spineless person?
Nothing. I don't think he has anything to teach. He's always so general. And he's always so goody-goody, and he's like foam or like arguing with the cloud. I don't want to learn anything from him. I just want to get him right.
Oh, you want to get him right?
Keep disassociated. And
Well, to be specific, right here now, at this moment in time, I don't want to chunk it too much smaller than that, but I could.
Yeah. So what would you want right here and now? Here's a person right here.
Well, the moment's passed. We got a new moment for him to be right.
So what would he be doing? I mean, I'm just trying to get a frame here as to what it is that how would you know if he was thinking right?
He'd be a man. He wouldn't be a spineless wimp.
Well, how would you tell
I don't
he's
want
a
to be
man?
judgmental, but he'd be one.
Right. Well, since you don't want to be judgmental, let's look at what specific behaviors he would be giving you to let you know that it was right.
He would argue back. He'd stand up for himself.
Well, I want to look at the general case, not a specific example. Take the things universally and try and see
By the
what's
way,
out there.
let's stop and also, as long as you're working with two people, you've got some interesting things like how they go about. I mean, they're obviously in what in NLP you call a calibrated loop. These people are arguing, but they're arguing according to perfect rules. He says something, and he lets him say his thing. He's not trying to stop him, which is actually kind of an interesting thing. It's almost like he needs for him to do that in order to keep going. If he's not trying to stop him and say, quit doing that or don't do that, he's actually, I mean, I'm just looking at their pattern of behavior, because if you ever do work with two people, you want to kind of make some general observations about, well, how do they interact together? He's not interrupting him. He lets him talk and then responds to it. And it's like they kind of have giving equal time. And they're really just kind of playing polarities. They're allowing for a balanced system here. It's one of the things, just as a thing to observe if you start noticing what they're doing. Now also, look at their behaviors, because the behaviors are other things that you can use to make a difference. For example, I could say to you, imagine if I said to you, well, You see, it seems to me that there's certain specific things he wants you to see.
This big, right?
No, there's these particular things he wants you to look at.
True.
Yeah. I mean, what happens? All I'm doing is I'm taking his little thing, so I'm going, all he's saying is, let's examine what he's talking about right here. Because look at what they're doing, you know? He chunks up and he goes out here and he chunks down, and it's like what they're doing is probably the reason that they're not interrupting each other is because literally, I mean, he's up here, he's down, there's no way to interrupt. I mean, if we were both arguing about the big picture, then they go, no, that's not right, no, that's not right. I mean, and I want you to listen to how those patterns work and see how they work, because if they were both looking at a big picture and had different content, they'd be arguing about that, but they're not. They're just passing it back and forth. Here's the big one. Oh, here's this one. Here's this. So one of the things I can do, if I'm going to, instead of just pacing predicates, it seems to me that clearly one of the things that's happening here is the framework that they're in is so different. He can't even tell me, well, what would he like to get from this? I mean, he's so, like he says, he's so caught in the moment, it's hard for him to even say something. That's a metaframe, by the way. I could even be pointing that out to him. I mean, in a way, what I am doing with them is part of the intervention. By commenting on what they do, by saying, oh, well, so your only problem is just that you chunk little and he chunks big. It doesn't seem to me to be too much of an issue. Would you like him to get to, you really just want him to see the details, isn't that right?
No, I want him to stop us buying a spineless limb. To count us through it, when this is over, can we go? Let me know when we can go.
Okay.
Let me know when I'm a master NLP programmer I can go.
Well, since you want to be a master NLP programmer, have you been able to follow with what I said? Because you can go when you figure out how to do this.
If I could figure it out.
Okay.
If I could figure it out here, I wouldn't need you.
Right. Oh, so
You have to look at the
need
big
me. So, okay, well, since you need me, what is it that you would most need me for in this particular situation? Because you want to, in other words, what you're saying is that you'd like to figure this thing out yourself.
No, you're generalizing. Let's get specific.
No, I'm saying
Let's get specific, and we got to get, I mean,
by the way,
let's be concrete.
By the way, notice, so I tried to make a maneuver out to here. He went, no, I won't buy it. Now, what if I just said, no, actually, that's not what I meant. All I meant was that what you need to do is you want to figure out what you want to accomplish right here and now.
We've passed the here and now. Now
right now.
Okay, that was 3 seconds ago. We got to be specific now.
Yeah, I'm specific. So what is it that you want?
For him to stop being such a spineless queer.
Okay. What are you going to see right here and now that's going to let you know that?
I don't know if I'd see anything. I'm not even looking at the guy.
Well, how are you going to know if you stop doing it?
Just don't worry about it.
I've had a lifetime experience. He's a spineless wimp.
Oh, you've had a lifetime of experience? I thought you just met this guy in an exercise.
I've met similar people.
You're not generalizing on me, are you?
I might be. Well, to be specific, you're right.
Okay, so let's be specific about how you know this. See, okay, so we're doing apply to self now. I mean, first of all, I notice if he does something, he's using a generalization to make this. And notice what he's doing. He's trying to be specific in terms of here and now, but he's very general in terms of his judgments. So actually, what he's doing is he's doing both. He's just got them sorted onto different logical levels. You can generalize. If you take all these moments that you're putting together, just like you know that he's had this behavior all the time, you'd probably be able to find some kind of patterns. You'd probably be able to, if you took all the moments of what's been happening here and put them together, just like you could take the life experience that you have of comparing similarities of people like him, you'd probably be able to figure out exactly what you need to do to resolve this.
Yeah, but as soon as the exercise, why resolve it? As soon as the exercise is over, you'll never see him again.
Well, wouldn't you like that?
Not see him again?
That's another solution, isn't it? Okay, so let's stop for a moment. By the way, you'll also notice at this point, I'm keying off of him mostly because he seems to be the point here that makes he's kind of going along with the flow of everything. I could start to balance it out by, let's start to find out if I start making him specific, can he still object? And that's the other interesting thing when you have two people, and me as the person here working with the frames, remember I said I saw a calibrated loop. He would go small and he would go big. What if I change it around and make him go small? What would happen? I mean, could he still do the same things that he did? Well, I don't know. And by the way, it's not that he even has to do it himself. I can be the translator. So really, I mean, it seems to me that what you're saying, if we want to be specific about it, what you're saying is that one needs to consider all of the bits and pieces that make a difference in the overall picture.
All the alternatives, right? And be flexible enough to adjust.
So that you can follow a certain specific path when you see that that's the most appropriate one.
Well, you have to look at all the paths and determine which way you want to go,
Now,
depending on your end objective.
now let's say I want to do hierarchy here. Let's just play and I'll demonstrate something. So I could find out from him, so why is it so important? I think what he needs to know, the specific thing you'd like to know, is why the hell is it so important to see all of those different
flexible.
alternatives? Well, what's flexibility going to get you? Are you inflexible?
Of course.
You are? Do you
Why
want to be
not?
inflexible?
I'm not inflexible, I'm steadfast.
Ah, okay. So, yeah, well, that's good. I would have had to do it for you. Thank you. So, if I come back over here, though, so I'm saying is, well, so part of the reason to be flexible is so that you can be steadfast.
Part of the reason to be flexible is so you can adjust,
Ah,
determine where
so,
you want to be,
so
so
yeah.
you don't get tied in.
Well, thank you. That's great. So, I mean, now he's doing the redefine for me. Okay, so he just redefined it as well. So, by the way, I mean, what I'm working for here now is let's find some way. If I can take what he says and redefine it, and take what he says and redefine it, remember our A equals B equals C? Well, if I can say, well, A equals B equals C, and this A equals that B, which also equals this C, well, then you're really in agreement, right? So I can take what they say, redefine it, and say, oh, so you're actually really saying the same thing. Which, in other words, because he wants to be flexible in order to make the right decisions, right? You want to be steadfast in order to make the right decisions.
Well, let's be specific.
Yeah.
If you give a counterexample, no, I don't have to be right. I just have to not be a wimp.
How do you, so what are you if you're not a wimp? Let's be specific.
A non-wimp.
Are you right now not acting like a wimp?
I don't know.
Oh, well, I
That
mean,
was
now
a
let's be
moment ago.
specific right here and now. Are you acting like a wimp?
Could be. Excuse me.
So maybe, he said, see, well, now I'm wondering, here I'll throw a meta frame. So maybe what I'm wondering is that maybe you're also worried about yourself acting like a wimp sometimes, and that maybe he brings that kind of thing out in you and you don't like that.
Okay, I'm gonna stop being a wimp.
Yeah. So in other words, so by the way, that was a meta frame, and it was also kind of starting to apply to itself, because he gave me a nice direction to go. He says, well, maybe I am acting like a wimp. Wow, that tells me a real interesting way to meta frame. So maybe what really is bothering him, and by the way, it's not uncommon that this would happen, is that he projects himself onto there. And the less that he's a wimp, the less he's going to see that in him. Okay, and that's one of those, I mean, that's one of those things that can be real interesting, is that people will not like things in other people that they don't want in themselves. And if this person brings it out in them, I mean, why does this guy have to be
Are you
so...
calling me a wimp? Is that what you're saying?
No. In fact, I'm saying that what I was hearing you saying is that you wanted to be able to act, that you were concerned about acting like a wimp.
You use too many words.
Yeah, that's okay. Your unconscious mind understands that, does it not?
Well, probably not.
Well,
Be specific about my unconscious mind. What part of my unconscious mind?
By the way, at this point, let's also, again, take another step back and say, so this person obviously, he's got another agenda going. He doesn't want to go, he's got a thing now with me. He's kind of saying, well, you're doing this now, you're doing this. So I have to now wonder, okay, I need to do some meta framing between me and you. So in other words, no, I think people should act like a man. And I don't think looking at the big picture like he's talking about necessarily makes somebody a wimp. I don't know how in the hell you can act like a man unless you know what kind of repercussions your behavior is going to have. He's saying in order to be able to be the most powerful that you can be, a man needs to look at the whole picture and to see all those different directions.
But
That's
to give
what
a
I think.
counterexample, isn't the feminine trait better?
Okay, well, see, now I'm hearing you say that you might have a conflict inside of you. On the one hand, from the one hand, that, you know, you're saying that you can't be a wimp, but on the other hand, you're saying that some feminine traits are good. Well, that's something I think that you might want to resolve for yourself. That's a metaframe. Okay? In other words, if he starts to counterexample, what I'm hearing, himself, it's like, well, wimp is good, wimp is bad. Well, wait a minute. That seems to me to be that there might be something that does, once again, need to be sorted out in him. And again, before we go back in the role play issue, again, if somebody is acting like that, if somebody won't respond and they seem to play the opposite side, it's kind of like he's doing a kind of a typical sort of a polarity response as much as a counterexample. I almost say that that's not quite a counterexample as much as it is he just takes the opposite position of whatever you're taking. A counterexample is not necessarily a polarity to what the person has said. Counterexample people are yes, but. He's not more so much yes, but. He's saying, no, it's this way. No, it's that way. No, it's this way. No, it's that way. So I hear a little bit more of what I call conflict. And then what I would wonder is, it seems to me that that's what I've got to label as happening here, is that there's some kind of a conflict, to be specific.
Yes, but I really want to.
Oh, now he's going to.
Yes, but.
But looking at the big picture.
Well, looking at the big picture, I think you can see that now, right?
Obviously.
Okay. This guy I'm having trouble with. And I don't think we have any trouble. What I'm hearing is that there's a little bit of a thing. And by the way, notice how this happens. This is the structure of things like projection and transference. If I have two conflicting parts in me, and you start playing one of the roles, I'm going to have to polarize to the other one. And you're going to be that part of me I'm going to argue against. And notice when I shifted and I was talking about how man needs to do this and this and this, right? And he goes, well, wouldn't you think the feminine traits are better? So it's a foreground background. He is going to have to take the role. In order to maintain a balance just in and of his own personal coherency, he has to play off the role that I am not playing. So if I go strictly to the man or strictly to the feminine traits, which is what he's calling feminine traits, which are not necessarily looking at the big picture. We got to be specific about what's really feminine here. I know a lot of very powerful men that were able to see the big picture, especially the master practitioners of NLP. Richard is really good at that. Now, if you want to call him a wimp and effeminate, I'll arrange a phone call. I'm just trying to get you to see the big picture of what the consequences that might happen.
Yes, but.
Yeah.
I'm still a wimp.
Well, but I don't think that's the question. Let's go to another outcome. That doesn't seem to me to be really the question that you want to find the answer to. I think you want to find the answer to what is the most appropriate balance of not being a wimp or not, but what's the most appropriate balance of masculine and feminine traits. Okay, redefine. And so I'm saying it's not wimp stuff, it's about feminine traits versus masculine traits. That's kind of a redefined chunking up. It takes it out of this context. But notice what it also is doing, it's pacing and leading him. Okay? And so what I can do is I can kind of be specific even though I'm taking a bigger chunk. That specifically seems to be the issue. What is the balance, the necessary balance of masculine and feminine traits? Do you know?
Well, to give a counterexample, I don't think that's relevant.
Well, it seems to me, though, that that's the concern that you had with him. At least that was the concern. So you said that wasn't really...
No, that's not really true. You're using too many words.
We were just looking at the big picture just to see.
Basically, he's a wimp that's always up here. And that's the problem. He never commits anything. He's never firm.
Well, is that true? Are you sure that you should... do you need to stay up there? It seems to me that you're very firm about that.
Flexible, yeah. Be flexible, be disassociated.
But you're pretty firm about being flexible, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Why don't you be stiff?
Like that?
Yeah, let's be stiff. Because it seems to me that, okay, we go meta level. He's going to be firm about being flexible. That seems to me to be a pretty manly thing to do. See, that got him, yeah. Okay. See that, so that maneuver, again, of going to a different logical level, okay, because it seems to me that that's something, if this guy was such a damn wimp, why wouldn't he have given in to you after all this time?
You cornered him. You cornered him, and he's just a nice guy. He's just
Super nice.
Well, I like to
sweet
stay
guy.
out of
Yeah, do you think-
controversy.
Well, do you think that, yeah, you like to stay out of controversy? That's why you're pacing him so well? Apply to self, okay. So in other words now, but I'm coming back to him, because I mean, that might, if you really want to stay out of controversy, don't you think that being able to pace an individual like this would help you to do that? It seems like you're creating a controversy.
No, just looking at the big picture.
Well, are you sure? Because that's all you're doing? And because if you looked at the big picture of your relationship to him, I think you'd see something a little bit different. Are you looking at that big picture of you in relationship to him?
Looking at our general conversation globally.
Yeah. What's happening? Are you creating controversy or resolving it?
In this context, it is not resolving anything in particular.
Right. By the way, listen to what he did. I thought that was great. I went, you, capability, are you doing this? And he says, well, it is not happening. Right? So, well, let's go down to environmental level here. You know. That guy's a wimp, can I say? I mean, because it sounds to me, though, it was like there's certain things, it seems to me like there's probably certain actions that you could take, given the various possibilities. I wonder what possibilities could you take to help this thing come to a resolution?
Identify specific areas of commonality. Right?
Listen to what he said, specific areas of commonality.
He's a global. Identify all the specific areas.
Oh, wait a minute.
Global, huh?
Can you identify a specific area of commonality for him?
Let's see. Not offhand, because I would try to keep things.
Well, no, let's get to a specific area of commonality, looking at the big picture.
Specific areas of commonality.
Yeah, like, you guys are both men, aren't you?
Well, what about the Florida gun law? I mean,
Is that an area of commonality?
I don't know
You
if it's
both agree?
commonality.
Well, that's what I'm wondering is, if you're good at looking at the big picture to see all those possibilities and you want to find the commonalities, that might seem to be something that would be real important for you to do. Okay, so, again, what you're saying is that I can pace and lead him into doing something that is going to also change this feedback loop between the two of them. Okay, so again, what we're doing here, what's nice about this is that, and I think it's nice about being in the meta position as a negotiator, is you can start to see how the sleight of mouth patterns will lead the person into a particular perceptual directions that are going to start to change the interaction loop. So I'm curious, what is something? If this looking at the big picture is really going to keep you flexible, are you flexible enough to be specific?
I'm always flexible.
Is it flexible enough to be specific?
I'm always flexible enough to be specific.
Well, could you be specific about one area of commonality? I want you to convince him that it's common.
Well, I think computers are a great tool. To
Okay,
utilize.
don't convince me, convince him. See, that's another thing. Now let's start. One of the things I want you to notice, sort of an overall tactic that I make. I kind of jumped up and we played around with big frames a little bit. Now what you're going to notice is I'm going to start getting specific with them. So now I'm going to say, don't talk to me anymore. At first, I wanted to be the intermediary between the two of them. I want to get the big frame set. Now I want you to look at him in the eye. You look at him in the eye. I want you to tell him.
Which eye should look at?
I don't care, as long as you're seeing eye to eye.
The general.
It doesn't matter. The third eye. No, so I want you to look him in the identity. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're flexible enough, you ought to be able to be specific about some area of commonality and convince him.
Well,
No, look at him.
Probably one area of commonality is that
Just want to make sure you're flexible.
all of our beliefs centering around the use of computers tend to agree that they are a benefit to mankind.
Which computer when?
Convince him. No, don't let him do that. Convince him. You convince him that
Probably one of the greatest benefits is the IRS computer, because they always keep tabs of where people are at, right?
It's hard to disagree with that.
Ah. Hey, this guy, he thinks like a man, doesn't he? How can you disagree with him?
But he's a wimp. Like if I push on him, he'll just back off.
Try it then. I think go ahead.
You want to hurt my feelings?
You're not being,
not
it looks like,
directly.
so I might comment on here and I might say, because you're actually being a little incongruent now. See, I'm wondering, it kind of seems like you're sort of being a little bit weak about this. I wonder if you really do think that he would just back off.
Yes, but I think he would back off.
Look at him and tell him you think he's going to back off.
I think he can back off.
You going to back off?
From what specific?
We've got the roles reversed now. That's kind of a generalization. Now he's being specific. And, I mean, by the way, what I want you to notice is, if you think about whether you're doing individual two-part integrations between two parts of a person, usually, you know why people get in the biggest kinds of conflicts is because his statement really is, your problem is I don't see any of me in you. That's what your problem is. I don't see any of me in you. You're alien to me. And his thing was, I don't see any of me in you. If you think about how does a parent, a mother or a father, know when their child is ready to think on their own? It's when you can see that the child has thought through a thought process, that if you can identify your way of thinking in that person. Now what most parents do is that they get kids into a way where they polarize against them, just like this, instead of saying, wait a minute, if I'm flexible enough to show you I can think like you, what can he object to? I can show him that I have that way of thinking in me too. And that's one of the things that I do if I'm working with folks like this to get rapport with them. Remember, by the way, you'll notice, he kind of stopped challenging me. He kept trying to do the yes but he couldn't challenge, he wasn't like so much as directing it at me anymore, because I went and I stood toe-to-toe with him in a small way. You know, I said, no, man's got to do this and man's got to do that. I understand that. I'm not bullshitting you on that. But he goes, okay, I see, now I know that you have that in you, and I don't have to worry that you guys are going to gang up against me. You can think like I do, and you understand my way of thinking. So if he can show him that he has that, then it's kind of like, well, then why does he select? Maybe then there's something interesting about why he selects to think the way that he does. In other words, 9 times out of 10, bias, those real basic things like bias comes because I cannot recognize myself in you. Or, number 2, I recognize a part of myself in you that I don't like in me. Because that's, how else are you going to make sense out of that kind of thing? Because especially for a person who's supposedly pretty specific, he doesn't get very specific about things. In other words, it's kind of more, he obviously is responding out of something that doesn't have to do with real world issues. He's kind of just responding from a pattern. I mean, he's just saying it because he has to say it, not because there's anything that really bothers him, as far as I can tell. It's the process that bothers you, not any particular thing that he's doing. And that seems to me to be the thing that needs to be resolved here. So he said you need to be specific about what he'd back off on. Can you?
Sure.
Look him
You
in
back in for anything.
On anything?
Yeah, almost anything.
Globally.
Globally.
Let's be specific here. Sounds like, see, because that sounds to me like you're doing what you didn't like in him. You're kind of chunking pretty big.
Well,
Give me
yes,
an
God. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I'm not totally consistent.
Mhm.
I'm just not a wimp most of the time.
Most of the time.
Just globally flexible.
Oh, so you mean you are flexible too?
Sometimes, but usually not.
Sometimes,
Usually
usually
pretty
not. So you're flexible enough to be steadfast.
Yeah, right this moment I'm not.
Okay, so the question then becomes, all he's saying is, if you're able to take a step back and look, you'll know when it's important to be flexible and when it's important to be steadfast.
I think to be specific, you're saying that. He's not. He's just sitting there like a dummy.
Now wait a minute. Are you
I'm
sitting
just-
there like a
I'm
dummy?
just sitting here absorbing, analyzing, rationalizing, figuring out what's happening.
So what's
Keeping
happening?
everything in a big picture.
So tell him what's happening.
We're just trying to get this item resolved a little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit. You know, not
What if you
totally,
wanted?
just totally.
What if you wanted to get it totally resolved?
I might even have to get specific.
Well, would you like to totally resolve this thing? So that he can get his master practitioner certificate?
Well, I think that's great.
Well, what do you need to do to resolve it? Go ahead.
What specific area?
Go ahead.
Not sure I know the correct way to approach this.
Well, just be specific, take a direction.
Well, like that IRS computer one was a great place to start.
In here.
He said the IRS
IRS computer is a great place
By
to
the way,
start.
what I'm doing right now is I set a bunch of frames, and what I'm going to do is I want to see how they start to interact now. I'm going to literally start stepping back. I don't want to have to be there anymore. I'll know that I have it resolved when they start going in a direction that gets somewhere, as opposed to going through the old patterns that they used to do. So that's why I said, go ahead and do it. I'm watching, I'm gonna see now, what do they do? Is their behavior different, or do they go back to the old thing?
Okay. To be specific, what areas would cause you not to be comfortable?
You'd back off on anything.
Give me any specific example that you have in mind.
You get along with people just at any price.
Well, that's not always true. There are sometimes
He hasn't been getting along with
significant
you.
areas of controversy.
Just a counterexample, sorry. I couldn't help it, you gave me that one on the silver platter. I didn't mean to interrupt.
He was just looking at the big picture and couldn't...
No, I was looking at a specific thing. that you said.
So you're looking for something that says stand up and take a stand, right?
I was a minute ago, to be specific, but right now, maybe, yeah, sure.
You need to be a little more steadfast in this. Why don't you stand up for something here? Don't back off on him, okay?
Yes, but sometimes it's good to back off.
Oh, that's what he's been saying. Oh, you've learned something from him.
You can learn anything from anyone.
Ah.
You can learn from a rock.
Ah,
Everybody has to learn every day, right?
that's a good belief. What else would you like to learn?
How to get out of this exercise.
Gracefully.
How to get out of this,
Well, as we continue during this, on with this discussion to find a way to solve this problem, we can both agree on some commonality of action, perhaps.
What do you mean English? Be specific.